Generally, I found that when someone sent back a not terribly nice response, a heartfelt apology and I'm so sorry, we won't bother you with this again, would often lead to, hey, it's okay, I'm having a bad day and I've just removed the links for you. So sometimes it's just about being human and understanding other people's point of view.
Hello and welcome to the Jumpstart podcast with Jeffalytics. I'm your host, Jeff Sauer. Today, for our 46th episode, we'll talk with Sha Menz, a Google penalty recovery expert and the founder of the Big Digital Adelaide Conference, which actually happens next week in South Australia. Now, for this episode, I was so excited to meet with Sha because she came highly recommended from several podcast listeners and former guests. So thanks to Jamie for helping me with the intro to Sha and my bestie Perna for her unabashed enthusiasm for just about everything, but especially for Sha. We recorded this episode on a Friday night in Australia time, a Friday afternoon in Lisbon time, and it was first thing Friday morning in the Central Time in the U.S. And Sha will explain to you why these times are important in her interview, so I'll just leave it at that. I'm recording this intro from an Airbnb in Sintra, and this is right before I'm going to go on a hike to the top of the Castle of the Moors. Now, we are publishing this episode just a week after episode 45, and we're doing this for two reasons. First of all, I'm looking to get back on a weekly podcast track with doing interviews every other week and then Jeffisodes every other week in between. And secondly, I want this to go live in advance of the Big Digital event that's happening next week. If you're in Australia and listening to this, you might want to give it consideration to go to the Big Digital event in Adelaide. I've really heard so many good things about it. Now let's talk about Sha. In our pre-interview chat, Sha told me about living in Kangaroo Island, which is a place that I was hoping to visit when I was in Adelaide last November, but unfortunately I ran out of time. But not only does she live there, she was one of the first people to use the internet on her island. Talk about a cool feather that she has under her cap. And being an early adopter has really helped her forge a career in both SEO and in Google penalty recovery once Google started handing out penalties to websites. But I'm going to let her get into exactly how that works. Now, if you're interested in Google penalty recovery or just understanding how complex it is to navigate the world of SEO in 2017, then you're going to love my chat with Sha Menz. Visit jeffalytics.com/Sha for show notes. Okay, so we're here today with Sha Menz. Sha, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Hi, Jeff. Great to be with you. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. You became highly recommended from some of my dear friends and former podcast guests, and so I'm looking forward to talking to you about everything that has to do with the digital marketing world and everything you do. And so let's get into it with our first question. And that's just, what got you into this? What got you into this world of digital marketing and got you interested in it?
I guess really I kind of came to digital marketing by necessity because I came by the route of building websites, but even earlier than that, I happened to be working for the local regional development board where I live in South Australia, and that board decided to get involved in putting together an ISP for Kangaroo Island, believe it or not, when the internet kind of arrived in South Australia. And so my boss came back to the office and said, guess what? We're investing in an ISP. We have to have a website. And so I went, okay, fine. And he said, I need you to organise that for me. And I said, what's the budget? And he said, oh, there's no budget. And so my task initially was to teach myself how to write HTML. So that was the beginning. And of course, once I built that website, which kind of, was a result of a trip to the mainland and a bit of pouring through the library at the public library and scratching together a bit of HTML knowledge and all of that. Then I began being asked by people to build websites for small businesses around the place. And of course, there was a necessity to actually have those businesses, those sites, turn up where they could be seen. And so I kind of started doing SEO before I knew that it was called SEO, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of led me in. And through that process, I ended up working for a company in the US, and then got into penalty recovery. So it was a very, very long road, but it all kind of started with that one initial challenge from my boss.
That's crazy. And so that's sort of a really unique opportunity when it comes around, is to sort of have to figure out exactly, what is the internet, or not so much what is the internet, but like how do we put things on the internet? And it's obviously a very unique opportunity in the timing to get to that point.
Yeah, it had sort of, up until that point, I guess it probably really was what is the internet. Up until that point, the extent of the internet for me had been email, and I guess in the job that I had been somehow become responsible for setting up the email for everyone in the office and on the board and all those things, which probably stemmed from way back in the early days of when the first Apple computer arrived in my high school, which is probably way too long for us to even think about, But I guess it was kind of like a thread, one step led to another, and so here I am.
So one thing that you said that was interesting to me about it is that, I think if you're tasked with creating a website, you can basically do the bare minimum, or you can turn it into something that you can get people to find it. You can become the authority on it. So it seems like you took that route naturally to say, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm not going to just do it halfway. I'm going to really learn how this thing works, and I'm going to make this useful. I'm going to make it so people go to it. I don't know if you can remember back to like the revelation that people actually, these are real people going to these websites, but how did that progress for you?
Yeah, well, I guess, that first initial website, it was pretty easy. I didn't have to do much more than build it and, let the local grapevine tell people it was there. And, it kind of, in those days, it was more about directories and listing a site somewhere and that sort of thing. So that was a fairly natural progression. But once I got to the point of being asked to do work for other people, and I eventually had my own business, established my own business where I would do digital printing and also build websites for people. So once I was doing that, and those people were predominantly small businesses here, people who had holiday houses, for example, that they wanted to rent. Of course, this is a very high tourism area. So it became really necessary to actually figure out, okay, well, how do we get these sites, where they can be seen? Of course, once we got into the world of search engines, it was like, I guess it became a little bit addictive. It was kind of that challenge and the creativity of trying to figure out how to make that happen, and why is someone else where I want to be, and how do I get there, and all those things. So yeah, and I think it does kind of, once you get it in your blood, it's hard to walk away from.
Yeah, absolutely. And were you finding that in your local area that it was sufficient to be ranking? Was it adopted as quickly in Australia as it may have been in the US or a different market? Because I know you mentioned that you ended up working for a US company. Were the people able to catch up with your acceleration, or did you have to go elsewhere to find that?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I look at the way that the markets have developed across the world, and I guess having worked, in different parts of the world, I see the markets a little differently. And in Australia, we still are kind of, I feel like we have a long way to go in terms of the larger businesses, the big corporates and those people. It's some of our large department stores have, only been actually on the internet, so to speak, for a couple of years or so. And, some of them are still, on the internet, but don't actually do business there. So it's one of those things where in Australia, it was the tiny micro businesses, the people who had the little tourism business that they needed to get out there for everyone else to see, and that sort of thing, who were actually the leaders, in using the internet for business. And, it's kind of, to me, it seems the other way around, on the other side of the planet, much more that, businesses, sort of larger businesses and big corporates really started using the internet for business much more quickly. And in some ways, there are still a lot of very small, mom and pop stores that aren't even there yet. So to me, it's a little bit of a, it's kind of flipped around a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think that's, I've been to Australia a few times, and a lot of people talk about it from that perspective, and that is that it's about what 1/10 or 10 to 15% of the population of the U.S. And so you have a lot of opportunities, but also just the pool that you're drawing from might not be as large. And so I can see where people who are appealing to the outsiders or people who are maybe visiting might be the early adopters, and then going on from there.
Tourism is a very big part of our economy here in Australia, and also a lot of people are now doing things that are, I guess, a little more diverse. We have agriculture, tourism through agriculture, and we have people developing amazing food products and, great wine and all those sorts of things. And it seems to be more, those grassroots sorts of businesses who are actually, really a long way further down the track than some of the bigger companies. But, that's not to say there aren't bigger companies who are doing great stuff too. And it's really interesting to think you live in a country where, Wi-Fi came out of here and electronic banking came out of here and all these amazing things. But at the same time, there are still lots and lots of people who aren't really perhaps taking the opportunities that they could be taking with the technology. So it's a bit of an interesting mix.
Yeah, for sure. I think that actually seems to be a trend in a lot of places, that even if there's early adopters, getting it out to to everybody and getting the mass adoption can be difficult at times. And so that's interesting. So explain a little bit more about, the process of getting hired or working with a company out of the US. How do you find them? Is it, how do they find you? How do you find them? How do you decide that this is the next step that you want to go through?
Okay, it's probably not the story that everybody would imagine. In actual fact, it came out of me building websites for small businesses on Kangaroo Island, and I would actually be, doing something, and I'd be writing a little bit of PHP code, and it wouldn't be quite going the way I wanted, or there was something I wanted to do, and I just wasn't quite, because PHP I could write, but it wasn't my preferred habitat, let's say. And so I was using some bulletin boards and things like that. And as it happened, the guy who became my boss was one of those amazing PHP developers who kind of hung out on boards and helped people out. And so we got to know each other, and we would, message backwards and forwards. And he, at the time, was running a web development company. And he and his partner were in need of a copywriter and someone who could write. And of course, I was actually, before I got into the digital world, I had been in the journalism world. And so I ended up doing some part-time contract work for them while I was running my own business. And then eventually we got to the point where they kind of said, hey, we'd like you to come and work for us full-time. And so I made that decision.
Awesome. I mean, it doesn't sound, it sounds a lot like how many relationships start to form, especially on the internet, is just like people gravitate towards other people who share a vision or share a certain work ethic or ability to produce things. So,
and it's interesting to me because we have a lot of people who kind of espouse this idea that if you're going to have a successful company, you have to have, everybody in the same room, everyone in the same building, whatever, that you can't really do that virtually. But I think in actual fact, if you have the right kind of people and the right kind of desire to get things done, you build a culture and you can use the technology to build a virtual culture that's just as strong, I think, as what you can have face to face. And it's really interesting because for probably the first 3.5 years of my work with the company that I was working with in the US, I actually didn't meet my bosses. So, but I probably talked to them more than I would talk to most people who were, in the same room with me. So, because we would spend a lot of time on the phone and chat and all those things, we just learned to use the technologies to make them work for us.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you and I are talking not on Australian time. I mean, I'm in Europe right now, and you're in Australia, but we sort of scheduled it on U.S. time, which is sort of interesting as well. And so it sounds like you made that decision early on that as a remote worker, you were going to adjust to the time that everybody else is working in for sanity or for the ability to stay in touch with people. How has that been? Has it been challenging? Has it been something you used to? How does that work?
Basically, I think I just got used to it. It seemed to make sense that when everybody else was, on the same time zone but me, that I would just move to that time zone. I learned to adjust, the way I worked and the way I rested and those sorts of things, so that I could do that. And so I'm comfortable with that. I do travel quite a lot to the US to speak at conferences. I've been, just recently came back from SMX in Munich. And I guess the hardest part for me, I think, is if I'm traveling I guess the first thing is if I find myself in the USA and I'm actually on the time zone that I normally work, I kind of have to do a bit of an adjustment then. It's not so bad if it's Eastern or Central, but for some reason West Coast time kind of really messes with me for a while. So it sometimes takes me a week or so to find myself not over the Pacific somewhere, but apart from that, it's pretty easy.
Yeah, and I think that's true in anywhere, no matter what time you're working, just making that adjustment and going, it can take a while to get used to it. That's sure. Interesting. Yeah, so that's actually just overall, like, this whole process of getting hired by a U.S. company and working with them, it sounds like you were able to grow with them or work with them for quite some time, and to get everything, to grow your presence, to grow their presence. Did the company sort of grow up with? Did you grow up with the company? Did you continue to offer services? How did things evolve as you're going along, and how did being remote factor into that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because we were a web dev company, and then of course I was actually doing SEO as part of what we were doing for the development. I was project managing and writing and doing digital marketing for those clients. And of course, in 2012, along came a little black and white animal called Penguin. And having had some experience talking to clients already who had some issues and things like that, I was faced with a situation where a client contacted us and had a problem. And when I looked at the scale of his problem, it was really quite huge. And so in discussions with my boss, we kind of came up with this idea of this bit of software that might help me to do the job of fixing a client's problem. And once we developed that, then we made the decision to release it as a product. And when it became successful, we pivoted from being a web dev company into being a SaaS software company.
Yeah, that's a huge change, but it seems like it's been successful in doing that. So
yeah, for sure, and the company is still successful and doing well. And I've just recently gone a little bit further down the road, moved on, and started a partnership with a partner in Dallas, Texas, and so. Still working from here now on Central Time, and we're doing some really interesting stuff, and of course getting involved in helping to manage events as well.
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk about your event because it's coming up soon, and I've heard, like I said, I've heard really good things about it from friends. They've told me that I got to come down to Adelaide and join as well, and the speaker list is fantastic as well. But even before that, I like to understand where people sort of go into this personal branding or more like the confidence to go out and speak and to talk about things. So on your timeline, it sounds like right around 2012 was a big moment because Penguin comes out and you have the answer to a certain extent. Were you speaking before then, or did you sort of like once you became the expert in that area, was that when you started to speak? How did that piece happen?
Well, I had spoken at little things, but nothing, sort of industry-wide. But actually the big moment for me came in winning a spot as a community speaker at one of the most amazing conferences on the planet, which is MozCon. and that came for me in 2013, I think. And that community speaker spot, I guess, gave me the opportunity to stand on a bigger stage than I'd ever been on before. And it's true, if you get the chance to speak at MozCon, it changes your life pretty much. So that was huge. And I guess the thing was that because I was working in penalty recovery, and I pretty much spent my days waiting around in the sewers a little bit, I got to see a lot of really interesting behaviours. And so when I was actually specialising in that, I guess I had something I was talking about that not a lot of other people were talking about, and so I got a lot of invitations to speak, and of course that one leads to another. So
yeah, absolutely. And so it sounds like it was more of a, well, I mean, it was planned to a certain extent, but also once this big opportunity, getting on a large stage at MozCon, I think I might have been at that MozCon, actually, the 2013 one, and then it just opens up so many doors for you. Yeah. Well,
I guess I had also been fairly active in the Moz community, in the Q&A and things like that, and in terms of personal branding, I guess for me it was more just an opportunity to share what I knew and help people out where I could, and that just, I guess that becomes personal branding, but you don't think about it that way. You just do what you can when you know things, you have knowledge about things, and they're things that are creating problems and challenges for other people. Just the opportunity to be able to help them out and share things is really nice, and I guess that turns into a bit of people knowing who you are.
Yeah, for sure. And then it's on, and then in addition to that, it's a going to events, but then also bringing events to your area. So let's talk about your conference that's coming up. How did you get into that? How long has it been going on? And what are you specializing in there?
Okay, so Big Digital Adelaide is this is the second year this year, and it came out of our local SEO meetup group. So I became involved in getting a meetup group happening in Adelaide, and the company that I was working for, Remove, co-sponsored that with Quasi Studios in Adelaide, and a lot of people probably are aware of Woj Quasi. He's the man who does those amazing one-on-one interviews that are around the place. There's a few interviews with people like Rand Fishkin and Dr. Pete and a few other amazing people. So we started an SEO meetup group, and we found that first of all that the market in Adelaide seemed a little different. South Australians seem to have a bit of a bit more of an individualistic and can-do kind of an attitude. So there didn't seem to be as much of an industry base in this state as there is elsewhere in Australia. So like the Eastern Seaboard seems to be much more industry-driven. And so there were people who were kind of doing things and working, but they seemed very siloed and, not necessarily so connected to each other. A lot of small businesses who were doing things and didn't necessarily know that there were other people out there working in the industry. And so we felt that it would be a good idea to put something together to help those people out. So that's what we did. And it was great last year. We had a fantastic event. And so we're, I think, a week and a half away from the next one.
I've heard that it's pretty wonderful, and obviously the destination is pretty great as well.
Yeah, we've made it even better this year. We've actually scheduled the conference to start on the day after a food and wine festival called Tasting Australia, which is basically 8 days of food and wine nirvana in South Australia. So we've got a few people, I think, who might be coming for a few days early before the conference.
Yeah. Well, I think we have some listeners who are going to put it on their schedule for 2018 as well.
Fantastic.
Might be a little bit late for 2017, but it sounds like the 2018 edition will get you some friends over there too. That's great.
Okay.
So when you do the conferences, obviously there's an accomplishment in getting all these people into a room together and getting people the opportunity to have the level of focus that you have to talk to each other. And so is that part of the reason why you put these things on? Is it more it sounds like geographic, like just giving something back to the people of South Australia is important as well.
Well, it is a little more difficult, I think, for South Australians and to some extent for Western Australians too, I think, because of the fact that, well, in South Australia in particular, people don't get paid as much here as they do in the eastern states. And so the impact of travelling to events in the eastern states is actually pretty big for South Australians. We have a reputation here. We've got a great startup community in Adelaide, and part of the reason for that is because developers don't get paid as much. So it's easier to get hold of someone who can do the work for you. So that sort of means that if people are going to go to an event and they want to be involved in something that's great, then it's a big impact for them to just the travel and accommodation without the cost of a ticket. So that's one thing that we've kind of tried to make the event as affordable as possible, and make it so that it meets the needs of the South Australian audience. But at the same time, of course, it's about giving everybody information that is, the best information we can possibly get hold of from the best speakers. And so that's actually resulted in some people coming from the eastern states and from Western Australia as well. So we were really pleased last year. I think 25% of our audience came from outside of South Australia, so that's pretty cool. And we've actually had people this year who have asked us to give them letters so that they can come from countries like Kuwait and Saudi Arabia to come to the conference. So that's pretty amazing. Yeah,
absolutely. That's exactly what happened with us at MN Search. We started as like a little meetup community, just talking about SEO and everything, and it's evolved to beyond what anybody would have expected as a result of just that tight-knit community and making it part of people's routine to go to these things and to be around people and to network and to do all these activities that you wouldn't normally be able to do. You'd have to go somewhere else to get that to happen.
That's right. Yeah. And I think sometimes the people who are involved in events that grow in that way are very dedicated to setting themselves apart, to having a culture and a feel that belongs to them. And so that can sometimes result in them going that extra mile to, get that bit of different content or that great speaker that nobody would imagine would come to a little place like yours and things like that. And, the other thing in this industry is that we have really, really amazing, generous, incredible people who want to come and share the knowledge that they have, and the fact that we have, Marty Weintraub and Perna Virgie coming to Adelaide next week is just incredible, and Dwayne Brown, who's gone out in his own company recently and who's made the commitment to come down here to share with people. We've got people who are really putting themselves out to come and share with the people of South Australia, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's great. And it's funny because, when you look at your evolution, bringing the internet to South Australia and then, realizing that not everybody was ready for it. And then, sort of taking a lot of time to figure out, not to figure it out, but you had to maybe go elsewhere or align with bigger communities in order to reach your vision. But now you're able to bring back that, the presence and you can show that it's arrived on the map. Like we are here now. It's taken a while, but we're here.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think in some ways Adelaide and South Australia, we're kind of viewed as the big country town in the rest of Australia sometimes. We definitely are a little different. We own that completely. But I think what's interesting is that there is a huge amount of amazing stuff happening in the digital world in this state that probably the rest of Australia doesn't really know a lot about. And so it's wonderful to be able to, give those people who are working hard in the trenches, the opportunity to have access to the kind of people that are coming in for this conference and, to give them those opportunities that everybody else has, kind of almost by default. So, yeah.
No, that's cool. I mean, yeah, hopefully your conference helps put that on the map a little bit more and lets people know the cool things that are going on. And the other thing is, even if it's in support of other areas, like it sounds like you do world-class work with your specialty as well. And actually, I'd like to sort of move over to talking about some of your specialties and where you decided to specialize in the world of internet marketing and just get some practical tips on how you work, basically. So I know, penalty recovery, actually, I think for some people listening, they might not even fully understand what that means. So maybe to start with, like, what is a penalty recovery and how does it factor into what you do?
Okay, so the bulk of the recovery work that I do, I focus mostly on unnatural linking. And most people, if they have had a problem, would have come in contact either with the manual actions team at Google or maybe at Bing, or maybe there's another couple of search engines that these days have their little penalty teams as well. But I guess primarily people think about Google penalties, and so there's the manual actions team. But then there's also the algorithmic adjustments that we've had for the last several years that were to do with the Penguin algorithm. So really, that's about, in most cases, it's about identifying what links are potentially doing you harm and what are not, and then cleaning up the mess, pretty much.
Yeah, for sure. So basically, around 2012, Google started to say, no, you can't do this anymore. You can't be... links up until that point, and then it's like quality links, good links, making sure that they're not spam, making sure that you're not over exploiting. And a lot of people got hit with a hammer saying your website is no longer trusted or ranked in Google or whatever search results based on your activity. And so you go and say, okay, well, let's get this fixed. Let's fix this problem for you. Let's clean it up. Let's undo some of these things you've done in the past.
And I guess the big thing that happened, while a lot of the focus has been on Penguin and the algorithmic effects, for the vast majority of people that I've worked for, and that's really because we decided to specialize in manual actions more so. Those were the people who were actually required to do the cleanup work in order to have a reconsideration happen, and basically to have the manual action removed from their site. So for those people, the critical thing was to actually try and get rid of those links. And so I guess the thing that I did a little bit differently was in doing that work to try and find ways that we could actually make gains while we were cleaning up the mess. So a lot of people just, went out and did whatever they could do and said, okay, that's good enough. But what we tried to do was identify ways we could actually be clever and awesome and give webmasters a little bit of a smile in their day and hopefully make them, think well of us so that they'd go to a bit of extra effort and actually remove those links, because it's not always an easy thing to do, and you have to remember that you're asking someone to do something for you for free, and it's time and effort on their part.
And is it it seems like it's difficult work. It's you can't really overpromise on this one, because you can go through and say, hey, I know how to find the suspected links that are not very good. I can find them for you. You even have software that can do this, that can automate that process and at least discover, but we can't really guarantee anything that's going to happen because we're at the will of search engines. So we'll do the best we can, but you also, we need time, and we need a lot of resources to get this done, I would assume.
Sure. Well, in some ways, if you're dealing with a manual action, what you need to do is prove to Google that you made what they call a good faith effort. So if you can show that you have done everything possible to try to remove those links, and you give them evidence of that, then generally, if you've done enough work, then you can resolve a manual action. I think where the challenges come is that a lot of people perhaps are not willing to go that extra mile to, to try and find the contact information that might not come up when you just automatically try and pull it out of domain tools and those sorts of things. And so I guess that's where I've always tried to make sure that we kind of went down every rabbit hole and, chased down every possible way of getting in contact with people. And in some cases, some cool stuff, like just get on the phone and call people. If you happen to be able to find a phone number for them, call them on the phone, explain the situation. Often, someone who is kind of sick of having email after email come to them, if someone actually calls them on the phone, they'll go, oh, okay, you're a real person, maybe I'll help you.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things like that. And one of the things that we tried to do with the software that we developed to help people with the whole process was to provide a platform for webmasters for them to be able to actually collect the link removal requests themselves via an API, for them to be able to put a message in there that says, hey, I don't have the resources to do this, or, contact me in another way, go fill in a form or whatever it was. So we gave webmasters a way to actually control that a little bit. And I think that helped in a lot of ways, for them to be able to feel they were able to manage that process instead of just being constantly bombarded by requests.
Yeah, for sure. I think that makes a lot of sense. So not only, one of the questions I have is, I notice that a lot of people is that they are capable of doing many things. You can have a lot of specialties and be good at a lot of things, and then the specialty comes along, and you can either find the specialty or the specialty finds you. And it seems like in a lot of cases it finds you. Like you're going through something and you're like, this is both interesting to me and the time is right. Something changed in the marketplace where I'm going to make this my focus. Is that what happened in your case?
Yeah, it pretty much was. I guess I had that one job that I was challenged with, and it was kind of decision time. It was, if we help this person, it's going to be like a massive job, and it's going to put real strain on us doing work for other people. So can we find a better way to do it? And as it happened, we came up with a better way. And so then, once we started doing that, and I started digging around and seeing some of the incredible lengths that people will go to create unnatural links, it's kind of amazing. You think, I've seen everything now, and then, tomorrow, now I've seen another 6 ways. And, I've seen some crazy stuff that people would do, and it just, you kind of get fascinated by it. It's one of the really interesting things to me is how some of the smartest people in this industry are the ones that are doing the stuff they maybe shouldn't be doing. And also how sometimes people will expend massive amounts of energy for very little return, when they could actually just, if they put that effort into doing something in a different way, they could probably get a lot more return from it.
Yeah. And that's not just from an SEO perspective. That's a lot of things, right? People try to create overly complex solutions when a lot of times it's the simplest one that's going to get you where you need to be.
It's part of the human condition.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's a lot of times when you're dealing with smart people, which most people who work in the web are smart people, they try to engineer a solution that is this, the smartest one perhaps, and maybe not the simplest one.
Yeah. And I think also sometimes, especially when it's an area like penalties, people feel challenged and they feel, that they've been hard done by, persecuted in some way. And so sometimes that brings out, that part of the personality that makes them kind of do things in a different way. And sometimes you kind of have to stand back and look at what's going on and go, okay, what's the best approach here? And it's funny because, in the link removal business, a lot of times people kind of get flamed. You can send a request to someone and, you might be the 300th email that landed in their inbox today with the same request. And, sometimes they aren't really going to receive that well. But generally, I found that when someone sent back a not terribly nice response, a heartfelt apology and I'm so sorry, we won't bother you with this again, would often lead to, hey, it's okay, I'm having a bad day and I've just removed the links for you. So sometimes it's just about being human and understanding other people's point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's good advice for everything, right? Is that people, you can recognize a form letter or a fill in the blank template from a mile away. Just being personal and taking a little bit of time, spending more time on requesting fewer things, you're going to get a higher success rate.
Exactly.
Your success rate overall, not even just the rate, but just the amount of success you have will be much higher.
Yeah.
And I couldn't agree with that
And
anymore.
there have been instances too where people have just done things to delight people. There's an instance that I talk about quite a lot when I speak of. There was a company who had a linking problem, and they hired an agency to try and remove links for them. And the agency very cleverly developed a cutesy graphic that was a pirate ship on the stormy seas of Google. And, they sent it off to people with like 3 lines of pirate speak about being in trouble, army hardies and all that. And the webmasters who received it were so just delighted by the approach, that they got responses back like, I don't remove links, but I had to remove these for you, kind of stuff, And, the bonus of that is you actually made someone smile instead of making them, feel like, oh, I've got to deal with this again. But you also, increased the response rate. And the other part of it was that in the end, I think Barry Schwartz wrote a blog post about it on Search Engine Land, and they got an actual link from Search Engine Land to this company that had a linking problem. So, that's a pretty good response in the end. And sometimes it just takes that bit of imagination and taking a different approach, and you can get a whole lot of really good stuff that comes out of it.
Yeah, it's like the Derek Sivers CD baby, like their message whenever you would order a CD from them. It was like, we have this team with white gloves who are individually wrapping this thing for you right now. Yeah, I mean, injecting personality into things, it goes a long way. I just did a podcast about that as well, and I think the more you can be yourself and the more you can be creative, the more responses you're going to get overall. And it's not even just rate of response, it's the quality, and it's the relationship that gets built as well.
Exactly. And sometimes it's the things that we have in our lives that are always the same, that, that one person who decides to just take that bit of a different, quirky approach to it. It's funny, we at Big Digital Adelaide, we've adopted a strange little pig with his nose in a trash can, who is it's actually a part of a bronze sculpture that lives in Rundle, and you may have actually seen it when you were in Adelaide, a little family of pigs. And so we've adopted the pig with his nose in the trash can as our mascot for Big Digital Adelaide. And so if you're watching our Twitter stream, you'll quite often see references to squealing and snorting and things like that, which is really kind of funny, because a few people when we first did that went, you've got to be insane.
Yeah.
But we actually get people go, this is really cute and really cool, and we really like it. And I've had people who have actually gone and, gone straight to the mall to seek out the pigs and see, what's going on with this. So sometimes a little bit of creativity and being willing to step out and do something differently can pay off.
Oh, absolutely. And curious about, I couldn't agree more with what you're saying, like basically being something that's original goes so much further. And then instead of, because I think a lot of times career-wise or just presence-wise, a lot of times we try to copy the people who influence us or the ones who we admire and try to do that. And I think that's okay at first, but as soon as you can turn it into, this is our personality, this is who we are, the more people, the ones who agree with you are going to genuinely agree. So you're going to have maybe fewer, but a lot more passionate followers and fans.
Yeah, and that that personal branding thing you were talking about earlier, I guess that's one of the things that I've always been a little bit resistant to kind of follow the data, so to speak, in terms of my use of social media. And so, you won't find me auto-posting. You won't find me posting at certain times of day because that's when I should be posting. You'll find me kind of, weirdly saying things when they kind of come to my head and stuff like that. And, I try to just be me. And it's really interesting because people Sometimes you do things. I tend to be one of those people who does weird things. Occasionally I once sent cookies to the team at Moz when they had a massive problem with their crawlers a couple of years ago. I baked cookies and sent to them because they were on 24-hour shifts and stuff, and it kind of offended me a little bit that some people thought I did that, as a way of, getting myself noticed. But it was really just a touch of insanity. And I guess that's the thing is, maybe some people think that's kind of the persona I've adopted, but unfortunately it is just insanity.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm curious, and this is, I probably should have asked this earlier, but we got into a good piece on personal branding. Have link removal requests and the need for that, is it cyclical? Is it sort of died down? Are people still trying to game the system? How's that going?
Yeah, people are still trying to game the system. What's interesting, I guess, is that we now have a situation where Penguin has been rolled into the core algorithm, and so that has changed the way that unnatural links are assessed, in that it's happening constantly. And so that makes it more difficult, to actually identify if you have a problem. Something has changed suddenly. It's more difficult to say. You can't kind of overlay it on a map and say, oh, that was when Penguin updated anymore. But there are a lot of people who have taken some of the information that came out around that latest update and kind of made some crazy decisions. So there are people who decided they would take down all their disavow files and things like that, which is not a good idea. So in some ways, there are less people who actually have a handle on what's going on. But one of the things I found really interesting was when the latest changes, or actually prior to the latest change or the latest announced change, we saw an uptick in manual actions again, which had kind of eased off for a while. But I think my understanding of that is probably when the testing phase started, which seemed to us to go on for quite a long time, for the release of the last iteration of Penguin. There seemed to be a lot more manual actions coming through to us, people who are looking for help. So my take on that is probably as those the testing and as more things are found and worked into the algorithm, there's probably a correlation. We heard from Gary Eash that they don't flag from Penguin for manual actions, but they can actually now see the data from Penguin. So, to me, just because someone doesn't send you an email doesn't mean you're not being flagged. So,
yeah.
So, if they're able to see those patterns and things that are happening, I guess the natural progression from that is that, if there is a situation that's not being handled by the algorithm, then the manual actions team is going to have to deal with it. And so it seems that there are still people receiving manual actions. And I guess as the algorithm is refined, there'll be more people who will be seeing effects from that. The big issue for those people might be actually identifying the problem. And generally that's going to now mean looking at a backlink profile and determining, what is in there. One of the other things that has been really big is that we've noticed a lot of people who went ahead and did disavows during the earlier iterations of Penguin. Many people have made mistakes with those. And so we've worked with clients where we've just done a disavow audit and discovered that, they've been on a 12-month PR push to try and put themselves out there and earn, great press and links and all those things, naturally that they should be doing. And in actual fact, all of those people who are talking about them, they've been successful in actually gathering that press, but all of those companies who are talking about them are actually disavowed, which is not helping, especially when you're paying to have that happen. So, it's a good idea to go back and look at what you have in your disavow file and just make sure that it's all supposed to be there, because that can make a big difference. And we've seen clients who basically all we've done is ordered a disavow file and re-eval those things that never should have been in there in the first place, and it has made a difference for them. So that's probably my biggest tip at the moment, is go back and kind of make sure you're good with your disavow file. And the other thing is people who did disavow files but didn't actually do them properly, so they may not be formatted correctly and things like that. So it's always a good idea to go back over them.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's, it seems like there's probably a certain profile of website, how long they've been around, how much SEO they've done in the past, that will dictate whether how badly they need something or needing some help. But if you've been around for a long time with your site and your domain, and you've tried a lot of things, chances are there'd be some benefit from talking to a professional who can look at these things for you, and who has the tools and who has the knowledge and to let you know if there's a problem or not.
Yeah, and the other thing that happens too is sometimes we can be misdirected by our tools. A lot of people will assume that they don't need to look at the historical index for things because all that stuff is gone. And in actual fact, that's not necessarily the case. So if there's a time limit on the data for historical data, then links that have been around longer than that are probably still out there and you're not seeing them, things like that. So there's some pretty interesting situations we've looked at where people have done all the work and not been able to actually get the results that they expected, and then when we go and dig further, we've discovered that there's actually data out there that they're just not aware of. So one of those things, be a little bit careful about just accepting that what your data or your tools tell you is for sure. It's a good idea to go and check, do some crawling, make sure those links are gone, that sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it seems like a good investment too, if there's a lot at stake for a large website that gets a lot of search traffic, to be able to get more, or to at least know or have that sense of security. It seems like money well spent to talk to an expert.
It's a good idea from a branding point of view as well, because if you have a company that depends on your brand and you have a lot of stuff that looks a little dodgy, we all have the tools to look at them these days, and people can do you damage just by talking about you if they don't actually understand. Nobody actually knows whether you've got something disavowed or not. So sometimes we look at things and say, it's not a bad idea to actually see if you can get rid of that. So it depends on the individual company, the individual site, and where you stand from a branding perspective and from a competition perspective too. Sometimes there's a lot of competition in some niches and people go all out to, get one up on you. So sometimes you need to look at it in a slightly different way.
For sure. And I think that, now people who, if you're listening to this and you're interested in it, you know who Sha is, that there's a lot of things going on in the background, and there's software that you can talk to. There's a lot of things you can do to see if you're at this point. And it probably has to do with, is there a profile of somebody who would you have known by now in 2017 that you have a problem, or are there still lurking problems that people don't even know about, and they just sort of assume that's the way it is?
Yeah, there's a lot of people who still don't actually understand what their problem is or where it's coming from. So there's a lot of people who are aware they've got a problem, but they've never actually figured out what it is. For some people, it might just be that they have had bad linking, as a part of their site overall from the very beginning, and so they've never really made gains. It could be that's actually been a problem for them. So some of those people who are sitting on sites that just never have gone where they expected, sometimes it can actually be that. But the other thing is that anyone who's actually had people do work for them and hasn't actually had some kind of input or involvement in the work that's actually been done, so not really been aware of what's been done on their behalf, that would be a big red flag. You would want to go and try and figure out exactly what was done. You don't want to be that person who's kind of got a problem but has to say, well, I had no idea. And I've unfortunately met a lot of those people in the last few years. So that's something. But the other part of it is that people are still sending those emails that say, we can, trick Google and do it on your behalf and just pay us money and we'll get you all those wonderful white hat links. And my approach is, if you can buy it, then it's not natural. So just don't go there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's funny. I still get those emails all the time. And so even though Google's laid down the hammer on a lot of websites and these tactics, people will still think that it's the right way to go.
Yeah,
and every time I'm just fascinated by that.
Yeah, and people, if people offer you something that, sounds like it's going to solve all your problems, I guess, when people really want their problems solved, sometimes they don't necessarily think as clearly as they should. And unfortunately, some of the people who are selling that stuff really don't care. They'll grab the money until the client is angry with them and goes away, but, that leaves the client in a bad position, but they've still collected their dollars, so they don't really much care.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is that we could have, made that comment when you first got into the internet, right? That there's people who fit that profile. I don't think that a lot's changed in this area. I think you get what you pay for. 2, check for reputations from the people, from vendors, check to see if they have happy clients, and then make sure your expectations are in line as well, because somebody can do a lot of work for you, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to generate results. Right,
exactly. And often, the other part of that is, choose to listen to what other people say about them, not necessarily what they say about themselves.
Yep, exactly. Yes. Talk to clients, get as much of a reputation as you can, and if they have to understand that.
If they have to tell you how good they are, then probably they're not.
Yep. Or what? Yeah, exactly. I think that, case studies and results speak for themselves when you get out there. And I think that's part of, going back to the speaking piece and the conferences, those getting up there and talking about how if you did these actions you talk about and you got these results, that can go a long way. I mean, I think that a lot of times that's why conferences are such an effective way to generate leads for your business in general, is because you're the expert out there and you're sharing the results and you can show exactly what it's like when you do these things. Yeah. And in the penalty recovery area, really, it's not rocket science. Really, the secrets are in recognizing the things that most people overlook. Yeah, it makes sense for sure. And I think that anybody who's listening and who's interested in more of this, I mean, there's, follow Sha. We'll give some links to things you've done in the show notes. And then I'm sure that you can do some searches online and learn about this more. And like you said, it's not necessarily rocket science to get it done, but it is attention to detail and it's hard work. It's a lot of heavy lifting in order to get these things in place.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just things like understanding that the way you expect something to work isn't necessarily the way it does work. We've had situations even not that long ago. I discovered that when you look at the data in your Google Search Console, that the list of links that you get that you can download that Google gives you doesn't necessarily include the same domains as the list of domains that they give you. So we've had clients who have been working on stuff and done everything they possibly can and still can't, move that penalty. And then I just by accident downloaded the list of, domains that link to a site, and discovered that there were a whole bunch of domains in there that actually weren't being reported in the URL list. So then we went and crawled those domains and went, oh, wow, look at all this stuff. So, sometimes it can be just as simple as relying on something and not realizing that you're maybe not getting the whole picture.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, great, Sha. This has been really, really helpful. I'm actually going to go and take some action off of this myself, and I think that others are as well. And so, thanks for joining me. Is there anything else that you wanted to add for our listeners, or anything that we should share?
Just thanks so much for having me, and for anyone who's headed to Big Digital Adelaide or headed to State of Search in October, I will see them there, and we look forward to hearing more of Jeffalytics.
Wow, that was great. It's so awesome that when through the course of conversation, I start with one preconceived notion and then the guest makes me totally question all of my assumptions before that point. And Sha did that with her knowledge of Google penalty recovery. Well, it's easy to think that your site is safe in the eyes of Google. There may be penalties lurking behind the scenes all along. It's like a parasite hiding in the shadows, and sometimes it takes a professional diagnosis to discover that you have a problem. And now you might be thinking you have a problem too because you've heard this directly from an expert. So I really appreciate the chat, Sha, and I really look forward to seeing you next year at the Big Digital event in Adelaide. For show notes, visit jeffalytics.com/Sha.